Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Marta Agostinho. I'm the coordinator of EU Life, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to today's EU Life webinar on moving forward in research assessment, perspectives from research organizations, researchers, and funding agencies. And this is actually part of our EU Life policy webinar series, where we aim at creating a space of discussion and bridging the gap and bridging together policymakers and scientists and researchers in aspects that are absolutely framing the way we do research and the way that science influences the world. So we had the first webinar about careers in and beyond academia earlier this summer, and today we will focus on research assessment. And one of the main reasons why we decided to organize this webinar is that right now, in terms of research assessment, we are in a transition phase. There is a global reform of the research assessment going on, but we are in this transition phase where not everybody is at the same stage. So we have policymakers having research assessment really high in the agenda and promoting change from the level of policies. And on the other side, we have researchers and research organizations who are the ultimate actors who will be impacted by research assessment. And they are also principal actors on this. But not all researchers or research organizations are necessarily in a hurry for a big reform in research organization. And this is why we decided to organize this webinar, to create this space of conversation, because we believe at EU Life that if we move together in the evolution of research assessment, change will be faster, but will also be meaningful for everybody. And that's why we want to discuss this today. And finally, research assessment is really about encouraging behaviors. So the question is, which behaviors do we want to encourage with research assessment? And there is a lot of questions and maybe not so much absolute replies right now in this period of transition. So I'm really happy to have this fantastic panel with us today that will be guided through these discussions by our moderator, Michela Bertero. Michela Bertero is currently the head of the International and Scientific Affairs Unit at the CSIC, a EU Life member in Barcelona, Spain, but she has also long been the representative of EU Life for Open Science. For example, she represented EU Life in the Open Science Policy Platform at the European Commission, and she's involved in a lot of policy and practice implementation of research assessment. So good morning, Michela, and over to you.
Good morning. Thanks, Marta, for the introduction, and welcome to our speakers who are encouraged to be on time, and welcome to all of you online. So I'll move straight into the heart of the webinar. Just to give you a broad overview, we'll have 3 panel sessions tackling different perspectives on research assessment with high-level experts from the research side and from the funding organizations. And we will leave the question at the end of the 3 panels, and we encourage you to ask questions so we can have a lively debate at the end. You can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And please feel free also to pose questions as you hear the talks, as we will gather all the questions afterwards. So let me introduce you the first panel. The first panel takes the dimension of the research institute, so research assessment of research institutions. And we want to tackle questions such as, why do we evaluate actually research organizations? What and how do we measure? What are the shortcomings of the assessment system? And how do we overcome them collectively? So to tackle these challenging questions, we have with us Johan van der Gronden, I apologize for the pronunciation if it's not correct, who's the director of the Dutch Cancer Society. And we have afterwards René Medema, who's current ULife chair and director of the Netherlands Cancer Institute. So let's start first with Johanna. I'll share your slides so you guide me through them. I hope you can see them.
Thank you, Michaela.
Now start the timer.
So good morning, everyone. Honored to be with you. I have to keep things simple, 7 slides for 7 minutes. So let's move to the next. Yeah, in the Dutch Cancer Society, the whole story starts with the patient journey. We have a broad-based organization supported by every 6th family in our country. So we do a lot of awareness raising, of course, a lot of fundraising as well, sensitization, a lot of campaigns. We advocate for better care, for good access and to affordable and timely drugs, of course, but including aftercare and the palliative care journey. Next slide, please. And since the focus is so broad, we have to make choices, right? So we have identified 7 focal areas, ranging from lifestyle and environmental factors all the way to end-of-life care. And you'll figure out later in the presentation by René that we have adopted 3 of those focal areas to cooperate on with the Netherlands Cancer Institute. Next slide, please. It would be good to notice or to say or to stress that it's not just about research funding, right? So research funding is one modality. Well, we spend a lot of money on lobby, a lot of money on information sharing, the patient information platform, for example, both online and physically, from the flyers at the general practitioner's office to the latest information on a clinical trial you may be able to join, is actually made possible by the Dutch Cancer Society. So you have a lot of modalities, a bit of a Swiss knife here, but we'll focus on research. Next slide, please. So there are 2 ways, actually 2 broad ways that we fund research. Looking at this year's spend would be around 90 million euro. 2/3 would actually be spent, many of you will recognize, and many national scientific institutes, many even EU, many multilateral institutions actually use that method or methodology, which is selecting the best possible individual project, right? So you have, usually we do it twice a year, sometimes a little bit more often. So you select on scientific excellence, on relevance, on feasibility. Typical scores from A to C. The A scores will generally be funded, and there's a lot of discussion on the B scores. There's an independent scientific committee, and so on and so forth. Typical project funding would be $500,000, lasts for 4 years, you know all that. So we have hundreds of these projects running on an annual basis. But then we have 2 ways of funding that will draw attention to today. 2 institutes we fund. This is, of course, a different ballgame. You select the institute one way or another, but it's a much broader funding strategy. So let's look at those 2. Next slide, please. The 20 to 29 million, by the way, is an indicative figure. So it's sort of split among the Oncode Institute on the left-hand side of the Netherlands Cancer Institute, which we'll focus on in this panel later on. So Oncode Institute is a Dutch Cancer Society brainchild. It's an innovative institute. It was started a few years ago. It's a virtual institute, and here we don't select on a project basis. We actually select the brightest brains, let's say the principal investigator, and then provide them with free money. Now, this sounds like heaven to you guys, but you get free money for 5 years to spend, since we rely on the stature of the researcher. So we build an ecosystem here, but it's a bilingual institute because part of the institute is a limited liability company. All the shares are owned by the foundation. This is the valorization part. And typically they deploy and employ business developers. So scientists tend to be very good in their area, but not necessarily are the entrepreneurs among them. So we put these types together, and honestly, the jury is still out. Is this going to work? Is this not going to work? So we want the best of science, but we also want the best of entrepreneurship, and we want rapid implementation. But let's focus on the Netherlands Cancer Institute. Next slide, please. So what we typically do is, of course, first of all, look at the strategic plan of the institute itself. It's an independent institute, has its own board, is at arm's length of the Dutch Cancer Society. We can't own shares or anything like that in the institute itself. So, and we are within, well, at a day like this, within a brisk walking distance, but let's say within cycling distance from each other in Amsterdam. And we more or less grew up together. The Dutch Cancer Institute is a little older than the Dutch Cancer Society. We've been around for 70 years, and René will tell you a little bit more on the history of the Netherlands Cancer Institute. And then, of course, we try to agree on focal areas. René will explain which ones these are. So the strength of the institute, and from an initial assessment and then a contracting phase, we'll move towards a midterm evaluation, which is exactly where we're moving to now. And then we ask an independent panel or committee to look at the criteria we agreed upon, to look at the key performance indicators, and to tell us whether we're on course or not. And then at the end of the 4 or 5 year period, we do another final evaluation, which is again done by an external body. So we sort of sign up to that independent review and then live with the recommendations. And there's a lot of, let's say, due diligence going on in the meantime. Of course, we have our normal auditors, we have all the obligatory stuff that you guys are familiar with, and which of course also applies to this relationship. I should probably underscore, and I have 1 minute left, Michaela, thank you, that the Institute is indeed at arm's length. So in theory, the Netherlands Cancer Institute and the Dutch Cancer Society could go its own course. That's different from the research institutes, for example, that are part and parcel of the Cancer Research UK, or the Danish Cancer Institute, which is part and parcel of the Danish Cancer Society. And we somehow hope that this, on the one hand, strong bond, but on the other hand, trying to objectify the relationship improves, in the end, the impact we try to achieve together. Thank you so much. Over to you, René.
Thanks a lot, Johan. So we'll hear now from the Research Institute side. René.
Yes, thank you, Michaela, and thanks, Johan, for setting this up. So I will do 2 things. I will first spend a few minutes on, what has EU Life done in terms of, dealing with research assessment, and then I'll go over to the particular situation of the Dutch Cancer Society and the Dutch Cancer Institute to extend on what I was pointing out. So EU Life is an alliance of 15 research centers in the life sciences, and basically what we try to create a voice in Europe. But that voice in Europe is mostly based on us trying to understand what do we view as best practices, what do we view as the way forward for example, a topic like research assessment. So EU Life organizes quite a large number of working groups that deal with critical topics or critical topics to us, career development, but also in particular research. So again, there we've been discussing how do we deal with research assessment, how do we view research assessment, what do we perceive as best practices, and we've realized that research assessment is perceived differently across the different member states of Europe. And what we're trying to do is, once we identify those best practices, to see whether we can implement them across, or we can accept, the best ingredients across the different institutes that are members of EU Life. The particular values that we want to promote are essential to understanding what should be the topics that should be dealt with in research assessment. So as an institute, it is always important to ask yourself, what's unique contribution to society, because that, of course, determines a lot of what the assessment criteria should be about. Should they be quantitative versus qualitative? When can they be quantitative and when should they be qualitative? Trying to define which are the useful metrics. I won't have time to tell you all that we've learned in the discussions of EU Live, but I decided to zoom in because I think it's a very interesting and telling example how we and the Dutch Cancer Society developed that, assessed those criteria over the past, I'd say 8 years or so. And of course, there are emerging in research assessments. So EU Live tries to incorporate how open science, how can you assess transition, efficient transition towards open science, innovation and technology transfer metrics. If that you want to create is impact on society, then your technology, your innovation should actually reach society, and how do you measure that well? And of course, overall impact on diversity, equity, etc. But as said, I won't have time to deal with all of those issues. I decided to focus on the relationship, the big partnership, that's been running since 1948 between the Dutch Cancer Society and the Dutch Cancer Institute, which, as Johan said, is at arm's length. So who are we? We're the Dutch Cancer Institute was founded in 1913. When the Dutch Cancer Society was founded, a partnership was welded, and that's been ongoing ever since. It's clear that our missions are aligned. The mission of the Dutch Cancer Institute is to find a solution to the problem presented by the disease burden that's presented by cancer, and the same mission applies for the Dutch Cancer Society. So clearly, it becomes relatively straightforward to understand what is the type of impact that you want to create, that we want together. Currently, about a third of our annual research budget comes from the Dutch Cancer Society. Part of that is core funding. I mean, you could basically call funding, for which we built the institute. We built the foundations of the institute, not the bricks and the stones, but the recruitment of the group leaders, etc. And then part of that comes through project funding, and even part of that comes through the other institute, which is the ONCODE Institute. Now, I think this is a critical point I want to make here. We realized from the beginning on, when we started to talk about research assessment, that our societal impact should be a shared success. It's important to the Dutch Cancer Institute to show that it has a need of existence, right? And then we need to show that we can create impact on the problem of cancer. And that same success is, of course, very much needed for an organization like the Dutch Cancer Society. And I think why is this such a critical point is that often changes in research assessment, and Marta alluded to that a little bit, changes in research assessment are often seen by a threat to a research institute. It was our vision that changes in research assessment are a need for an institute like the Dutch Cancer Institute. But I would argue they are a need for any research institute. Society is asking us the question, what's the impact that you create? You need a way by which you can be assessed that tells that story. What impact do you create? Now, this is a we've been working on this for a while. So this started. We have a 5-year rolling contract. So the contract that we had, I think, this is off the top of my head, between 2015 and no, it was 2015 and 2019. We did our first attempt at measuring impact. And so we defined a number of key performance indicators. And key performance indicators, you should think about, okay, how many papers do we publish in high impact journals? How many patent applications did we have? You would know how many clinical we do, etc. And there was one important lesson that we got from that particular experiment, which we also together defined as an experiment from which we wanted to learn. And the first one was research organizations are complex, adaptive. If you define key performance indicator such as patent applications, you will get patent applications. But the question you, of course, really need to ask is, what are the meaningful patent applications? I mean, do you create more meaningful patent applications, or do you just create more patent applications? And that's the, you know, a characteristic of a complex adaptive system. You ask it to do something, it'll do it, but it doesn't mean that the system itself changes to become more effective overall. Lesson number 2 was, it helped us to understand, how do we actually achieve impact? What are the critical things that we do that will help us create impact? What are the things that impact? And lesson number 3 is, who is responsible for it? Is it the individual researcher? Is it the individual project? Or is it the system that has to work in a way maximally organized to create impact? Again, you know, going back to that lesson of complex adaptive systems.
René, I'm sorry, but the 7 minutes are over, so if you can just wrap up.
Did I miss the 1 minute warning?
Yes, you missed the chat.
Well, I can wrap up because our second attempt is ongoing right now, and that's what Johan alluded to. We basically, from the NKI point of view, we said, where do we think we can create impact? And you see 5 different themes where we think we can create impact. And on top of that, we layered a question that came from the Dutch Cancer Society. How can you, these 3 areas of focus, research with a focus on clinical impact, how can you make your discoveries from research reach the clinic quick? How can you improve quality of life throughout these different themes? And how can you ensure that the medicines that are developed become accessible to the cancer patients? And so we've aligned our goals, but I think the lesson here is that the way we assess is to look at the system. Where are the critical thresholds? Where are the bottlenecks in the things that you're trying to achieve? And how can we together define those? And how can we together improve the way they work? And of course, that's our responsibility. And it's the responsibility of the Dutch Cancer Society to take that critical look. And I'm sorry I went over time, Michaela. You weren't all that rude altogether, but I'll hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you, René and Johan, also for explaining this nice partnership between a fund and research institute to discuss and evolve research assessment. So we move on to the second panel. I see a question coming up, so don't worry, we will have time at the end, and I encourage you to keep asking questions. So the second panels, we will move from the perspective of assessing a research institute to assessing individual researchers. And we will have important questions, like, for example, why? Again, no, we always need to reflect on the why. Why do we evaluate individual researcher? What and how should we evaluate? What are the obstacles to change? And what are the gains? So for this session, we have Paola Bovolenta. She's a member of the ERC Scientific Council, as well as research professor and head of the Development and Differentiation Department at the Center for Molecular Biology, Severo Ochoa in Madrid. And we also have Monica Bettencourt Diaz, who's a co-chair of the U-Life Alliance and director of the Institute Gulbenkian of Science. And she's also leading the group on cell cycle regulation. So we start with Paola. So Paola will not be able to share the screen, but I'll share her slides. Hopefully. Paola?
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much for the invitation to be here and participate in this webinar in research assessment and provide the view from the European Research Council. Next slide. Which, as you probably all know, is a program within Pillar 1 of the Research Framework Program Horizon Europe of the European Union, and has the mission of supporting excellent research through 3 main granting schemes for single individual PI that are divided according to the academic age of the PI, and one scheme that foster collaboration among researchers, a top of 4 in the Synergies grant. Next slide, please. So what is the purpose of evaluating an individual researchers? Well, in general, position, grant money are in limited amount, and therefore we need to select the most suitable and deserving researcher for such a position or such a grant. At the ERC, what we do evaluate in PI are their intellectual capacity, creativity, and commitment. And we do so by asking to panel member or to external remote evaluators a number of questions that are aimed at identify the ability of the PI to conduct groundbreaking research, their previous experience, and depending on the type of granting scheme, for example, for starting and consolidator, to what extent that the PI provide evidence of creative independent thinking, or in the case of advanced grant, if they have leadership and training capacity of young investigator. In the case of synergy grants, instead, we do we do evaluate the entire granting, the entire consortium altogether. Next slide, please. So how we do assess the individual researcher at DRC? First, we have one criteria only, which is excellence, and we use a two-step model, which is based on remote and presential participation of the panel member or external evaluator, together with, in the second step, an interview of the individual researchers. And we do so by taking into account the career path of the individual, of the PI, and a number of items, including the research achievement, which can include a different type of achievement, and that can be explained with a relevant bibliometric indicator, except the journal impact factors. Among others, we also offer the possibility of have a short explanatory narrative of the achievement, so that each PI can underscore what she thinks most important. Next slide, please. ERC aims at excellence also in terms of research integrity and ethics, and therefore has strategies to prevent scientific misconduct and to intervene in case there are breaches, in general, in strong collaboration with the host institute. And to this end, the ERC has set up two different standing committees. One is composed by member of the executive agency of the ERC, which is in charge of the program, and a second standing committee that is composed by member of the scientific council that also takes in account issues such as conflict of interest, for example. Once a proposal has been approved, then there is also a strong ethical review that is organized again by the executive agency, and has a maximum of 4 steps. The 3 last one, which also include the participation of independent external ethic expert. Next slide, please. So overall, at the ERC, we are convinced that our model of evaluation has a large number of strengths. For example, excellence as a sole criteria. There is competition between researchers at similar career stage. There is a certain freedom of presenting individual achievement. There is a minimal use of indicators. There are multiple opinions, so that there are several panel members plus external experts that can provide opinion in of the grants. There are interviews, strong policies against conflict of interest of the panel member, of the remote evaluators. There is a strong campaign against unconscious or conscious biases, monitoring of gender-related issues, and policies concerning integrity breach, as I mentioned. Of course, there are also weaknesses, obstacles, or challenges, like, for example, the heterogeneity of panel member culture, their capacity of imposing opinion, their backgrounds, unconscious and conscious biases, as I mentioned, are weaknesses and obstacles for aseptic evaluation. And especially one important thing is time constraint. If we wish we could have more time to be to be able to evaluate more in depth each one and single one application. And thank you very much for the attention.
Thanks a lot, Paola. I would then pass it to Monica.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's a big pleasure to be here today, discussing this important question to all of us and to science in general. And so I'll start, and as a researcher, also as director of an institute and member of EU Life, focusing on this perspective of how to evaluate researchers. And so as a director of an institute, we evaluate researchers in our recruitment of researchers, in the promotion of the researchers that we have here, in the rolling tenure. And there's many questions that come to us, in particular, some that were raised just before and also by René. So how do we ensure the impact of our institute in science and society? And how do we get the best researchers? And this, of course, how do we define even the best? So it's a difficult definition, and how we promote the right work environment, which again is a discussion per se, what is the right work environment. And so the agenda for today is just briefly discuss what and how should we evaluate researchers, and what are the obstacles that we face when doing this. And so there's been a lot of discussion about this, and many different events and declarations have come forward, and I will not summarize them. They are very important, so if you don't know about them, do have a look at them. But summarizing them, it's something that comes across is the importance that journal metrics do have many limitations. They are not transparent, they can be manipulated. That we need to take advantage of other sources of data, including online data, algorithms, raw data, confirmation data, because all of these are part of science, and they build the science that we need to move forward and to have impact in knowledge and society. Moreover, we do need to take in account the diversity of research and researcher roles. So it's not just the stars of science, but we do have to have in account collaborative research, which is more and more important. Reviewing an editing role, which all of us do, and it's critical for the advancement of science, but also the link to society and the outreach activities, mentoring and citizenship within our institutions, and of course, very importantly, open science. So there are many different perspectives onto these that we have to think about, and that were raised by these different events. So in EU Life, this has been, as René said, and Marta also, this has been a discussion for a long time. And this is part of what EU Life does, which is really to, with the institutes, that it has to discuss the best practices, because all of us feel that this is a very important topic that we have to improve on. And one of the events, besides the different discussions that EU Life has done, is to actually do a comprehensive collection of policies and practices, in particular when it comes to PI recruitment and PI promotion, asking the different institutes what are the criteria they use. And importantly, a main conclusion is that qualitative research evaluation is very important, and how much these researchers contribute to the different papers they have published, and more important than the number of citations, impact factor, and much less that H index, which is almost not used. So I would like to give 2 examples of what we do at Instituto Gulbenkian de Ciências. I've been a director of the IGC for 3 years, but actually looking at more qualitative factors is something that was started even before by the director, Jonathan Howard. And so when we are recruiting researchers, something that we say is that we actually, in the end, that we focus on the originality of the science and fit to the institute. And actually we do not take into account numerical indicators. And we do promote the DORA declaration and open science. So we are a research institute focused on biology and focused on fundamental research. And what we ask researchers is a motivation letter, where they also speak about the fit to the institute, summaries of previous research and research plan for the next 5 years. And this is very important because you really have an idea of how original the plan is for the future, and how independent people were in the past regarding their own research. A CV, including preprint. So this is very important for us, that the preprints are taken in account. As we want to get the youngest talent as possible, and we don't think people should wait for very long to start applying for positions, potential referees and referees to exclude. And very importantly, we ask for 3 publications that they consider of special merit with a brief explanation. And this is one of the most important criteria that gives us an idea of what people consider important in their own findings. We then conduct interviews, we have talks, and we have short talks, which are also very, very important. And I'm happy to talk about that afterwards. The other important timing is actually when we evaluate researchers. And I'm just going to give the example of the tenure researchers. And the criteria that we want to assess are excellence, and we also want to promote collaboration within house, because we believe that multidisciplinary collaboration is what brings a lot of novelty to science. We want to promote good citizens and mentors. So this is evaluated by the SAB, and with input from external referees and former lab members. So the researcher prepares a file with the scientific work, including preprints, but also outcome of students and postdocs, because we want to access mentorship, plan institutional contributions, because we want to access good citizens and collaborations. We also ask external referees. So this goes to the external referees, which are also supposed to discuss contributions and impact to the field, promise of these researchers and likely impact on the future, and whether they actually have created a footprint and a school of thought and generated new leaders in science, and how would they rate them as citizens and as colleagues. So, and we also ask for suggestions, because this is very important for people. What we do that many institutions do not do, and this is because we want to promote good mentors, is that we do ask former lab members to give also a letter to us or to the SAB. So this doesn't go to the external referees, it's just an internal thing, on their performance as a teacher and mentor. And this is very important for us, and there's been different things that have come out of this, and I'm very happy to discuss this forward. So we do have a lot of questions. So how do we assess societal impact versus impact in science? We are still not assessing, for example, valorization of science, contributing to the community, and there are still many different obstacles. For example, how do we assess the PI diversity? So we want to promote individual discoveries, but also very much collaborative efforts. How do we promote these? How do we promote objectivity when without the quantitative indicators and the work that this involves? So I think that events like these are very important, so that we discuss, and organizations such as EU Life are very important also to collect information and discuss different perspectives. And I hope that we have an important discussion afterwards. Thank you for listening.
Thanks a lot, Monica. We move now to the third and final panel sessions. We already have heard the voices of some funders, but this session is uniquely dedicated to funders and the role they play also in shaping research assessment. So the question here will be how are policymakers influences the future of research evaluations? What responsibility do funding agencies hold for changing research assessment? And so to answer these questions, we have Kostas Glinos, who's the head of Unit of Open Science at the European Commission. And we have Ignacio Lopez Verdaguer, who's a Director of Research and Innovation Department at the La Caixa Foundation, which is a private funder. So I will give first the word to Kostas and then to Ignacio.
Okay, thank you very much, Michaela. Good afternoon, everybody. So for us, what is certain is that the system of assessing research and researchers, so the system whereby institutions as well as funders do their evaluation, the criteria they use, is not completely fit for purpose in today's realities. And today's reality is that science becomes more collaborative. It's that it has a multitude of outputs. I mean, these were mentioned in the previous sessions. It is not just about papers and publications, about many other things. And these things typically are not rewarded by the current system, or often are not rewarded. So the current system focuses excessively on the individual, focuses on publications as the main output, sometimes uses general impact factors, in other words, rewards the venue rather than the intrinsic quality of the paper, and does not reward contributions to the scientific community and outputs other than papers. So I think there is a growing realization of the fact among both policymakers as well as the scientific community institutions that the system needs reform. Monica Bettencourt also mentioned these contradictions. Sorry, I get some messages. A lot of discussion is taking place, therefore, on how to reform the system, how to go forward. This discussion has taken place at the political level as well. You have seen, some of you may have seen last year in end of September 2020, that in the new era policy, we have put in action one of the top level actions actually for reforming the research assessment system. This was taken up in the conclusions of the Council of Ministers on two occasions, December last year and May this year under the Portuguese presidency. Just yesterday and the day before, we had discussions, some of you were present in Ljubljana under the Slovenian presidency on the new era policy, and research assessment was one of the central subjects. It was in everybody's lips. There had lots of discussions about it, not just in the sessions, but I mean in live. It was actually the first live meeting that I had for almost 2 years. So what needs to be done? For us, it's clear that it cannot be a top-down decision, because certainly not by the Commission, and but also for many countries, not only by the member states, because it needs to be top-down and bottom-up at the same time. It is the scientific community itself that must come to take action on changing the system. It is the research institutions and it is the funders. So those who do the actual evaluation of research and the actual evaluation of researchers are those who need to take action. And of course, it depends on the member state, political or top-down direction is also very important and useful. So we have been consulting on this since March this year, and what looks as the best way of going forward in not only in our opinion, but in the opinion of most of those who have consulted, many people, including of course you, including EU Life, who had meetings, is so-called coalition of the willing, whereby we form a coalition of all those funders and all those institutions, including research centers, universities, university hospitals, and so on and so forth, that are willing to change the system, and they want to do it together so that they can exchange best practices, they can learn from each other, they have a forum in which, so to speak, they can hold hands, and where we can ensure also that all the changes are consistent between the funders on the one hand and the research institutions on the other, because we cannot have funders, as it happens often today, asking for one thing and then institutions promoting, in other words, rewarding their researchers for something else. Therefore, it's very important to have the two sides, I believe, and the Commission is committed to play a part in this, not to lead this. We don't see ourselves as leaders, but more as facilitators, and as just one of many funders that hopefully will participate. So on the 8th of December, we have invited a meeting, unfortunately virtual. The next one hopefully will be in person, where we have invited, or we will invite EU Life as well as many other stakeholders to present the results of our consultation and the discussions we had, and to plan the way forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Costa. So then we move to Ignacy.
Okay, thank you very much, Michaela and Yulai, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I will try to be brief. La Caixa Foundation is well, an old foundation placed in Barcelona in Spain. It is just one example of the many philanthropical institutions that you can find all around the continent. We invest around, we're not very different from the cancer research Netherlands association, as we invest around 115 million euros in science in different forms. But today I'm going to try to concentrate on the research and health part of our funding. We also fund science and society issues through a science museum in Barcelona and fellowships for pre and postdocs and so on and so forth. But I'm going to try to concentrate on that today. And here, very briefly, what we do is, of course, basically the usual suspect tools that you can imagine. So we have several competitive calls for projects, some of them together with other institutions around Europe as well. We fund innovation as well, and we fund as well strategically some research centers in different areas. So infectious diseases with Irsicacha and IS Global in Barcelona, cancer research with Vall d'Hebron, and neurodegenerative diseases as well. Our big project now is that we are designing, as we speak, the Caixa Research Institute, which will be a new life science research institute, translational in Barcelona. But this is for another day. I can speak as well somehow from the foundations. Of course, they are very different, and I cannot speak on behalf of them, but from my privileged position as chair of the research forum of the European Foundation Center, which is a broad-based network of independent foundations and a platform to learn, collaborate, and advocate together, I can speak a bit through of some foundations. Foundations, as you know, we like to say that we are anticipatory and we are quite flexible in relation to other bigger public funders. We claim that we have some independence and we are complementary to public initiatives, and this makes us somehow kind of available to take risks where other can't. And today, in fact, I'm going to concentrate on that. So I'm going to explain you a couple of examples, a couple of pilots that we are doing, and that I hope that might foster a debate later. Here I put another example of what foundations do through the, for example, the Research and Research Institute, which is funded by the Wellcome Trust together with Novo Nordisk and Volkswagen Stiftung and other public funders, and they are doing a great work in experiments in evaluation systems. So the experiments that I'm going to talk about are some, let's say, innovative aspects of research assessment. One, the participation of non-academic stakeholders in peer review, the use of artificial intelligence, and as well the output management plans that we use, because for us, let's say that assessment is not only, I believe it was Marta before that mentioned, it's a behavioral change, so it affects the whole research performance, but not only the assessment in our view. In fact, these 3 experiments can sit in what we call the virtuous circle of research assessment. If we start with a strategy and impact framework, then we have to design the instruments, then do the research assessment, and then take care of the project execution and career development. So how this is done, and finally we have the indicators and analysis. But all that in our view belongs to a whole cycle. So to start with, first of all, the framework, it is very important. We have done a process together with some academic stakeholders, and the recommendations that we had is that we focus, and there are maybe different objectives, we focus in internal accountability, in understanding how we bring value to the whole research ecosystem, but as well how we evaluate the funding instruments to improve them continuously. And we have a set of indicators. I'm not going to go into them, but health impact, the potential translation of research findings into improvements of the welfare of people is one important aspect of them. Science and society issues, as some of the ones that Monica Bettencourt mentioned, are important as well. And as well, the analysis through impact stories and a vision of the portfolio management, which is impact oriented for us. This is very important. So the first experiment, and this is from the social sciences. We do research in social sciences as well. We have a social research open call that gives around 100, not very much, 100,000 per project. And it's very mission oriented. So it's to broaden our understanding of major challenges of today's society. And if you take a look at and this is the process of evaluation. I don't know if you see my arrow here. If we take a look at it is a 2-stage evaluation process, and this in the first stage, which is a short proposal, there is 5 academic experts that take a look and assess them, but as well 5 non-academic experts. And we make decisions with the combination of the academic and non-academic experts. So if we take a look at the correlation between what ones would have decided without the others, there is not much. So the view of the different groups are totally different, almost totally different, and this is a very interesting. It is not that we are proposing to do that in basic life sciences or even translational life sciences, but this is something to analyze. We know from other experiments as that of the Lind Alliance that it would be interesting to think about this possibility. Another one, artificial intelligence. It would be too much to explain all that, but this is about our biggest call. We fund up to 1 million euros, so it's a call that sits between what the national calls in Spain and Portugal give and what the ERC gives. So it's a very important call for the system. And here, the problem you can imagine is, of course, that we have around 700 projects, and then almost 3,000 evaluators. And what we do to assign the projects to evaluators is to self-identify the projects with mesh keywords, and we put some selection criteria to the evaluators that we have.
If you could wrap up, yes. You ignore my 1 minute left in the chat.
Oh, sorry. So, well, this is This works very well to assign the projects. I will be very fast now, but it opens the possibility of doing many other things with artificial intelligence. We have an experiment that we see that we can predict the 20% worst projects in this call, which is a very interesting one. Finally, it would be about output management plans and the trainings that we do, which try to complete what I was talking about of the circle, virtual circle of research, and that would be it. Some final learnings. I believe Marta was saying that it's used different words. It was in a transitional stage. I said it's under scrutiny. It is strategic. It evolves or should evolve with a strategy. It should be institutionally rooted. It's in constant technological evolution, and we believe that's important as well. It begins, not ends, with indicators and foundations. From our side, we can take risk and try to do pilots and bring something to the table. Thank you very much, Michaela, and sorry for my being late.
No problem. I think it. Thanks, all of you. Now it's finally time for discussion and for questions. Thanks for sharing your thoughts, and also for hearing multiple pilots and experiments either you've done or you're actually in the process of doing. So I see question coming up, so I'll give priority to the question from the audience. Actually, it's got two questions. They go kind of in different directions, so I'll ask especially the funders to answer, but also from the researcher's perspective. So one question is, we have been talking about impacts, how to ensure impact, how to evaluate impact. And one question is, how can we ensure that this focus on societal impact does not give incentives to move away from fundamental research? So this would be probably for Ignacy and Johan. But then there is another question, we point in another direction, that's for Paola. Could criteria of societal impact be implemented in the ERC framework? So let's maybe answer the first one, no? So it's this focus on social impact driving away from fundamental research. Who wants to start?
Well, I have a very practical answer, Michaela. The figures actually say we don't divert too much from funding of basic research. For both institutes, I would say, and René can elaborate on the issue for the Netherlands Cancer Institute, but the Oncode Institute as well, even if it's free money, I would say the majority of the funding goes into basic research. And this is, of course, at their discretion. The societal impact is more a matter of what I really liked about Ignacy's talk is the idea of coming up with output management plans, you call them, I think, within 6 months after the proposal award. This is exactly what we want to see. So you have these business developers knocking on your door all the time. Great guys that you're doing fundamental research, but what's in it for us? What's the feedback to society? The Dutch Cancer Society is not an institute that promotes scientific research per se. We want to relieve the burden of cancer on the society at large, and that's what you need to bring back. So it's a social return for investment, and that attitude needs to be promoted on a daily basis.
Ignacy, you want to add?
Well, we're a very quite similar institution in that sense. We have a broader objective than cancer, but in fact it's in our mission that we have to bring value to society. So we somehow do not only fund research for the improvement or enlargement of knowledge, which I personally totally believe it has to be done. I believe the thing is not to, it is not about how you evaluate, but the thing is, everything starts with a framework and with a strategy. So if in the strategy you have decided to allocate some budget in one place or the other, I don't know, if you would take the example of the Commission, you have the 3 pillars: excellence, societal impact, and tech transfer, let's say. So it is about a strategy, not how to, and then you have to accommodate the evaluation to the strategy that you have, and it might be some. But it happens to us as well, as Johan van de Gronden was saying, that we fund I don't know if more basic research than clinical and translational, but similar at least.
And Costas, I don't know if you also want to contribute.
Yeah, I think I would fully agree with both Johan and Ignacy. And I think also Johan spoke from the point of view of cancer research. I think there is no one size fits all. And when we say that we need to adjust the assessment system and to reform it to make it more fit for purpose and so on, we don't mean that everybody should have exactly the same criteria. If an institute or a funder or both, their main purpose is completely fundamental research in, I don't know, in astronomy or whatever, okay, of course, they need to, the criteria will be adapted to their purpose in life. Some other funder and or some other part of a funder, like Ignacy said, will have different pillars within Horizon Europe or Horizon 2020 in the past, in the case of the Commission, then the criteria can be different. But in all cases, I think an adjustment, a reform is necessary because the research today is not what used to be 50 years ago.
So to wrap up, we need diversity in research, but also diversity in research assessment. But Paola, what about including societal impact in the ERC framework?
Well, I can take basically the opposite view, but the same view that have just been spelled out. The mission of ERC is funding curiosity-driven research that can be basic, can be translational. It just has to be excellent at the frontiers of knowledge. That doesn't mean that ERC funds just basic research, and that doesn't have an impact on society. In fact, and is an example that has been taken on and on throughout the last 2 years without support to messenger RNA technology. There wouldn't have been, by the ERC, there wouldn't have been a COVID vaccine based on messenger RNA. And this is a huge impact on society. This huge impact has come at posteriori. It was not evaluated at priori. And it turned out to be a real important bet that the ERC has done on basic research. This is one example, but there are millions. The ERC has actually working group that is called the Science Behind the Project that has evaluated really what is the impact or has found out what is the impact on society of the ERC funded research, and there are large number of evidence that there is such a huge impact on curiosity-driven research that it really is worthwhile funding it.
Thank you. And I don't know if we also want, Monica and René, you want to add the perspective from the research institutes on societal impact.
Yeah, Monica, you want to go first?
No, go ahead, I'll go after you.
Yeah, so I think this is, of course, the question that underlies kind of the fear of the researcher that, you know, there will no longer be funding for basic research, and that's also the point I wanted to make. I mean, we shouldn't be afraid. This is this is the time we live in, and our, like Johan and Ignacy, understand that fundamental research is the basis for progress. But at the same time, they say we're not the organization that needs to particularly fund basic research. We understand that it's part of the equation. And that's why I'm so happy that we have moved in this partnership with the Dutch Cancer Society. We have moved to evaluate the system rather than the individual parts, right? It's the system that needs to have a basis on basic research. And then our funders, in this case, you know, the Dutch Cancer Society, but also others, look at our portfolio and say, okay, if these are the themes, do you have on board? Do external experts say that they are the creative ones? You know, items you heard also voiced by Paola and Kostas. Is it original? Is it truly creative? But is the system as a whole working in all manner to create impact? So that's why I think, you know, we should, yes, there are two ways of evaluating. The basic science has to be evaluated on excellence and creativity, originality, whereas, you know, the rest of the chain has to be evaluated based on impact, and it's the system that you need to evaluate. And it's up to us scientists, right? We can be afraid that there will be no more funding for basic research. So it's the challenge is up to us to make sure that we can visualize what the impact is.
I would agree, but I would also say that there is a sweet spot and a balance between one and the other. And I think this is what we have to collectively do, because it's easier also for society and for the lay public to understand when we talk about impact and not as much about curiosity-driven research. So I think as individuals and as organizations and as all of us understand the importance of curiosity-driven research and the importance of impact, we have to know how to convey the message that both are important and not allow just that the impact will drive everything else, and then we don't have the sources that we need for the impact. So I think we do have responsibility here, and it's not an easy one. So that's one of the challenges that we all have.
Maybe yes, Costa, sorry.
I agree this, and this is quite difficult, but it has to be done according to the institution. Of course, in your life, you have a common purpose in life, but if you look at the entire landscape of research and science, then you need to have some specificities. But yes, but what I would add is that in basic, very fundamental research, yes, should be evaluated according to quality or excellence and originality. But also, I think we should reward the right conduct. It is not only the outputs that matter, no matter what conduct the person has. It is also the process that should be rewarded. So an open process whereby you share your results, that contributes therefore to the efficiency and the effectiveness of the whole system in this particular area, should be rewarded. So sometimes we forget about the process or about the conduct, the behavior, and we are talking only about the outputs, which are of course extremely important. But I think more and more we should bring the process in and in the context of the researcher in.
Maybe I link to this last comment from you, Costa, for one question. Also, it's, you said, no, we want to fund excellent research, we want to fund excellent output, societal impact, and so forth. This was important to promote good processes, and that's maybe I refer also to what Marta said. No, we want to promote good behavior or fair behavior, open behavior. But how to do this? How to put this in practice? Does some of you have some examples or ideas?
Well, I don't want to be the first, but if you want me, I can give some examples, either futuristic future examples or current ones. So it's not going to be very difficult in the future. Technologically, it's possible today to see who publishes data sets, for example, or who publishes software, to what extent are these used by others, and to what extent are these reusable, fair, under the right licenses, and so on. In other words, to see whether the particular team or person exhibits, you know, it wants to contribute to his entire group or entire community towards a certain purpose, whether it's cancer or something else. So this is possible technologically, 100% today. It is not done so much, at least as far as I know, and it could be done far more in the future. If we had better infrastructures for digital outputs other than papers, publications. That would be very helpful. And this is another initiative that we try to promote, the European Open Science Cloud, that and you have many things also in like this or complementary to this in the different countries. Another example from completely different type is open peer review. Okay, this is my personal opinion, but I think open peer review, where both the identities and the review texts are open, is the future of review, and that because it gives the opportunity, besides other advantages, to reward those who do good reviews, because the reviews are citable and visited by everybody, so they can be taken into account in the assessment eventually.
Yeah, I would just like to bring up, I think those are
René,
really...
Monica was raising her hand
Oh,
first.
sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I stop. Somebody else to continue.
What Costa said, but I want to go to my earlier point and what was said afterwards. I think, you know, this duality between curiosity-driven and more impactful science, I think one thing that we can ensure is that the institutions that are doing the curiosity-driven research do have the capacity to make the impact if the research that is there is something that can have an impact immediately. Yeah, so that the research is open and everyone knows about it, but also if it can have an immediate impact. There is a team, you know, innovation team that can help researchers to take that to the next level. So I think that's a very important aspect that funding institutions can look into how that is done, and that we, directors of institutions, can actually see what is the behavior of researchers towards this. Are they open to discuss all possible impact of their research without having to do it, but being able to, you know, think about, you know, have a vision for what the future of that research and the impact of research may be. And that I think we can promote.
And so we have René, Paola, and Ignacy trying to keep.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the points that Costa, which are very relevant points, are points that ask questions to whether the system is working, right? I mean, can we share data? Can we collaborate? And so I would again bring back the attention to the point, should you evaluate that at the level of the system, at the level of the should you evaluate that on the level of the individual researcher or the individual proposal? And again, I would argue, no, the individual researcher has to be evaluated on the criteria of excellence and originality, whereas the system needs to be evaluated on basis of, are these things in place to for open exchange, for open access of data, etc., etc.
Paola? So because...
just to mention, I mean, but we may, I think that somehow we might.
We don't hear you very well, Paola. Maybe Ignacy, you want to go?
From the purpose of the website impact, but in any case, I just wanted to mention that, for example, the ERC has an additional program that I didn't mention at the beginning, that is the POC program, which allows basic researcher or curiosity-driven researchers to drive what they have found to an implementation or to a translational or industrial level, which is a little bit farther, so that this basic research can go further and have that societal impact that seems to be what has been taken in account now in this discussion.
Thank you, Paola. Ignacy now, sorry.
Yeah, no, fine. Well, for me, it's a question as well of modesty and of the relationship as well between the funder and the researcher, and understanding that this is a learning circle, and evaluation is a learning circle as well. Costas was mentioning the improvement in technology, follow-up of data sets, original software, but as well we can add to that clinical outputs, many other things that can be done already. But we have to accept that we are not very good in understanding how this is done, and not researchers and not even funders. So what we we are trying to do, we do not have it totally implemented, that is that try to manage the portfolio of projects that we have with a vision towards impact. And what we try to do is to have a post-award portfolio of training and mentoring activities for the researchers. So, but in order that we can learn as well, it's not only, of course, on we teaching the researchers, but the other way around. So it's a learning process that we would try to do together in translation of research, in technology transfer, in open science, and so on. So for me, it's a question about us accepting that we don't exactly know how to do it and engage in a learning process between funder and researchers.
Yeah, I think I also believe, I agree with this is very important, this dialogue and this learning together. And I think also how the foundation is supporting the researchers, no, to filling up the new impact management plan or other requirements. So there is so we have been talking about outputs, about behaviors of researchers. Here we have a question also on the process of research assessment itself, no, and. Here the question is, how do you see the role of the process of assessment? That means, for example, how indicators and metrics are applied, how we assess. And I think also in Paola, there was a mention on the challenges, no, on biases that are not gender bias. Sometimes I call it also the impact factor bias, which I don't know if it's conscious and unconscious, no? So, but maybe can you share also your attempt to improve the process at the researchers, organization perspective and the funder perspective? I don't know who wants to start first.
I can start. I mean, just by saying that, yeah, on metrics, as I mentioned, the ERCs try to use the minimum, and indeed has recently signed the DORA declarations. Therefore, the journal impact factor is something that is not considered in the ERC evaluation. What it really matters is the excellence, originality, and quality of the proposal. But of course, you have to judge, as mentioned before, also the capacity of the PI to really support and be able to attend or to take into account that or carry on that specific research. Unfortunately, in step one, we cannot interview all the applicants, which is would be the best way of assessing and really having an input of what a researcher can do. So we rely on a large number of achievement that can be of any type, especially because the ERC funds research in different fields, not only on life sciences, and therefore the outputs are very different in different fields. And that is basically what really matters for an evaluation of a proposal in ERC, at least.
Thank you. René?
Yeah, so the evaluation that we, for example, for the PIs that we hire in a tenure track, are the cycle is every 2.5 years. The first one is an intermediate, and then after we have to take a decision, which of course, if we feel that we cannot take that decision, we can postpone it by another year. The criteria for that assessment are really about asking the question, how original is the work? How likely is it to create knowledge that will have impact, either, you know, on creating truly original new knowledge, or, you know, something that can be trying to a clinical application. So, you know, of course, the evaluation committee will look at the output, but that's not a very important criterion. The criterion is really what's the aim here, how well is it on its way, how likely is it to succeed, And if it succeeds, what could be potentially the impact on either new knowledge or on something that could be of tangible use in clinical translation? In terms of our relationship with the Dutch Cancer Society, we used to do this in once every 5 years. Here we've also said it would be good to meet up and have an in-depth analysis after 2.5 years, and then do the final analysis for that contract period after 5 years. But in addition to that, we meet up quarterly to discuss how the system is actually working. We have defined bottlenecks and have a conversation together, and it's actually created a different relationship, because now we both have a responsibility, a shared responsibility, to see what we can do to fix those bottlenecks in the innovation chain.
Thank you. Someone wants to comment also more on the processes? Kostas?
Yes, regarding your question, I would like to bring in reproducibility. So you know that there has been a wide-ranging discussion about reproducibility, many papers and so on, some very shocking, at least for us as funders or as public authorities, really sometimes some areas shocking to see so much scientific output being doubted as to its validity. And when you see the analysis of the reasons, usually the reasons, or very often the reasons, have to do with the process followed. And I thought about this because you asked in your question about biases. And of course, GIF is one bias, but there are all the cognitive biases of the researchers that, I mean, we're all humans, so by definition they exist. For example, some of the papers, many of the papers on reproducibility mention the confirmation bias, so your tendency to look at the data, even subconsciously even, that prove what you set out to prove in the first place, and ignore those that disprove it, and but several other reasons that all have to do with the process followed. Therefore, I fully agree on the outputs, and you know, with the way it was phrased is completely right. But I would say the process is also very important, and both the person as well as the institution, well, and the overall system, of course, as René said, have the responsibility to ensure that the process is optimal or as good as it can be, because you get the behavior that you reward. If you don't reward the right behavior, you're not going to get the right behavior. You're going to get lots of papers, for instance, rather than few papers that are really high quality with very high impact.
Monica?
So I would agree with everything that has been said. I mean, I think there's another aspect that I raised during my presentation, which is the aspect of citizenship, and that goes also into reproducibility. And these, and we get from different ways. One of them is by asking the reviewers that we send out the package of this group leader when it is evaluated, and we ask colleagues to, you know, say whether this person is a good citizen, a good colleague, whether it has created a school of thought. All these things I think are very important, and we actually have very nice surprises. We also have not as good surprises. So I think it's something that if you frame well the questions, you can get very honest answers, and they are very important. The other thing is by asking former lab members what they think about their training period in that, and how that person was ethically and scientifically. And this actually has been very revealing also in some aspects, you know, so for some people very positively, for other people less positively, and we had to take action. And I think this is very, very useful. Of course, you can have, you know, exit interviews and other things that give you those elements, and many other aspects that you can get that sort of feedback. But when it feeds into the evaluation, again, it's about the reward system, and that is very clear that in evaluation, we value very well, you know, the mentorship and the environment that each one promotes in their own laboratory.
Thank you. I don't know if Johan or Ignacio, you also want to comment on these questions? No? So I have another one. René suggests the evaluation criteria should be different for individual and systemic levels. How can this be organized in the context of high international mobility of researchers? So I guess we can evaluate differently, but we also somehow need to coordinate.
Well, I would say, you know, I mean, particularly for basic research, right? That researcher needs to be evaluated on the criteria of originality. I would actually argue that for other types of research, like translational research and clinical research, and particularly the latter, that's going to need team science. So that doesn't really benefit from, of course, the question of originality should be asked, but there you already need to incorporate, is it an original idea, and how's the system in place to be able to accomplish what has been the impact that's been proposed here. So I'm not necessarily saying that each type of research has to be evaluated at the level of the individual researchers. For basic research, I would say yes. For more applied research, I would say you also need to take a very careful look at the system. Just the system, whether that's working well. And then what was your other question, Michaela?
I think was this the questions, yeah. I have a very quick question for Costas. If the event that you mentioned on the 8th of December is restricted to by invitation, or it's open to everybody?
It is restricted by invitation, but not really restricted. I don't know how many people we have in our invitee list, but it's probably 200. So okay. It is so we cannot. It is difficult to. It's not organized like a conference. It's a meeting with all those that we consulted. We have consulted probably 100 or 150 organizations. A lot of them, either directly or indirectly through their associations. And so we're inviting them back to tell them what we think the outcome of this consultation is and how we think to go forward. So in this sense, it's a closed one, but it's not that we have anything secret. So if any one of your members want to participate individually, we'd be glad to invite them.
Excellent, thank you. So unfortunately, there are more questions, but the time is running. So I would like to thank again all our speakers, also our participants for the interesting questions. And now we'll pass it back to Marta.
Thanks a lot, Michaela, and a very big thank you to our speakers, because I hope everybody enjoyed as much as I did this hour and a half. I think we raised a lot of important questions, and it would be really nice if we could now go for a coffee break and talk about all of this a couple of more minutes more. But if I have to keep in some kind of take-home messages, I would just spend the next 30 seconds just saying that I think Costas put it our starting point really well, which is the assessment system right now is not completely fit for purpose for the reality. And then we started unlocking with the different speakers that a lot of change is going on.
Marta, we lost you. I think you muted yourself by mistake.
I muted myself by mistake, so I don't know where I was before. Where did you lose me, Michaela?
Was that a few minutes ago?
Okay, so I'm just wrapping up, and I will repeat that Costas put it really very nicely, that saying that the problem is that the system is not fit for purpose completely in today's reality. And then we started unlocking a lot of change that is going on in our talks. So, for example, the Dutch example, that we are moving from evaluating individual parts to evaluating the system as a whole. Also, there's a change in the criteria of what we mean by excellence. So we heard a lot about citizenship, mentorship, collaboration. It's not that we are doing this already, but we are aware that this needs to be done. And then that we need to reward the process and the conduct. And then we heard about piloting as well, right? Including non-academic reviews, impact portfolio, and the role of the agencies to be like facilitators and the spearheading coalitions of the willing. So I think this left us a lot of food for thought, and thank you all. Thank you also to the audience for keeping steadily here, and stay tuned for the next EU Life webinar. Thanks a lot. See you soon.